Hey there, scary story fanatics! Welcome back to Cleaving Thought from Bone with your host, Sociopathic. Been having a great time at camp this summer, basking in the sun, fishing at the lake, and running terrified from supernatural maniacs hell-bent on destruction? Well, those are all certainly good times, but we're not done yet. So, grab your entrail mix and eternal sleeping bags. It's going to be a summer of blood you won't soon forget. The Silence of Locust Lake.
Have you ever heard of the Quiet Killer? The drowned boy of Locust Lake. He is one of many legends that come from the tainted land of the Black Woods. One of many fables birthed from the cursed waters of the lake. This tale begins far from the lake, where three friends sat in front of the TV, playing video games and talking smack about one another. What the hell was that? Troy, the one on the left end of the couch, said.
That was me passing your ass,
said Aubri from the middle.
At least I'm not coming in last,
said Terry from the right side of the couch. It was then that the phone rang and interrupted their gaming session. Troy paused the game before getting up to answer the phone. "Hello?" he said. "Hey, Mom. How you doing?" he continued. Troy was mostly silent for a few minutes before he turned to Aubri and Terry and asked, "Hey, do you guys want to go up to my parents' camp next weekend?" The both of them agreed immediately. The group of them always used to hang out at that camp when they were younger, and they had a lot of fond memories of the place. Then, after they agreed, Troy spoke on the phone for a while longer with his mom, and then he hung up. Camping season is going to be coming up in a couple of weeks, and my parents are going out of town. They were wondering if we could fix up the camp and get it ready for the campers, Troy added.
What do they need us to do?
Terry asked. Nothing big, just some painting and some tree trimming probably, Troy said. They said they would leave a list for us there. He finished.
Okay, and can we camp out too? And I bet the kids would like it,
Aubri added. I bet Shawnee and Jimmy would like to go too. They haven't been to my parents' camp in years, Troy added.
I'll give them a call and see what they think,
Terry said. After the phone calls to their friends, it was decided that the upcoming weekend, the group of them would head off south to the camp at Locust Lake in Pennsylvania. Troy and Aubri and their three daughters would ride in their truck, while Terry and Jimmy would ride in Shawnee's car. It was early in the morning when they all began their trip south. Shawnee, Jimmy, and Terry sat comfortably in the four-door sedan, the three of them smoking a joint while they drove down the highway. However, ahead of them, Troy and Aubri sat cramped in a truck that was filled with grumpy children.
Are we there yet?
The middle daughter, 7-year-old Sabrina, asked. Almost, Troy answered.
How much further?
Sabrina continued. Another hour or so, Troy answered.
Are you sure?
Sabrina asked. Yes, Troy said, a bit annoyed with Sabrina.
How much further is it?
Sabrina continued.
He told you about an hour. Will you shut up already?
9-year-old Monica answered her sister.
Can we stop?
Sabrina then asked.
It's not much further. You can wait,
Aubri said from the front.
I have to go to the bathroom,
Sabrina added. Then, their youngest daughter, Shiloh, began to cry. Shiloh was just a baby, and a familiar smell filled the car as Shiloh let it be known that she needed a change.
I guess Shiloh needed to go too.
Sabrina yelled.
Ew! Can we stop, please?
Monica then added. There wasn't much else that could be done, so at the next gas station, Troy pulled over so the lot of them could get what they needed, go to the bathroom, get changed, and do whatever needed to be done. They had already been on the road for over 2 hours, and they were nearly there. There were only a few more miles left to go. Shawnee pulled in beside Troy, and everyone got out to stretch their legs, while Aubri got the key to the outside restrooms and took the girls to use the facilities. All the guys went into the gas station to see what they could find. The gas station was an old one. Inside was all wood paneling with wooden shelves. The place looked like it used to be an old Pioneer store that just had gas station pumps installed outside to make it look more official. The place was a dump, and none of them thought twice about getting any food or drinks there because none of them trusted to put anything from this place in their mouth. Troy got brave enough to buy a pack of cigarettes from the store because at least they were company sealed and they were packed full of enough chemicals anyway, so they should be safe. Well, as safe as a pack of cigarettes can be. It was at that time that Terry entered the store and began to ask Troy a question.
Dude, where the fuck is this place?
Terry said jokingly.
I don't remember it being this far away.
Terry began, but was interrupted by the clerk of the store.
What in the hell did you just say, boy?
The man behind the counter said. He was a big guy with a beer gut that stuck out from under his sweat-stained wife-beater. He wore a hunting hat and had a thick 5 o'clock shadow. His dull, brown eyes stared angeredly at Terry.
I won't have that kind of fucking language in my establishment, boy.
The redneck blurted out angeredly.
I'm sorry, man.
Terry said nervously.
I'm a God-fearing man, and you best be too, boy. Now get the fuck out of my store.
The man yelled at them as he came around the corner after them, nearly pushing them all out of the door. At that time, Aubri and the girls were coming out of the bathroom. Troy stopped them at the door, dropped the bathroom key on the ground, and escorted them towards his truck.
What the hell?
Aubri asked, confused at the situation. The guy in there just freaked out. We gotta get out of here, Troy said under his breath, ushering his wife and daughters out of harm's way. They climbed into the truck, and the other 3 climbed into the car as the clerk from the gas station came out of the door with a shotgun in his hand.
Get the hell off my property,
the man yelled as he cocked the gun. This was enough to send the message, and the group of them left, squealing their tires to get away from this crazy guy.
What the fuck was that about?
Jimmy asked.
Guy's fucking crazy, man.
Terry replied.
He's lucky I didn't bust a cap in his ass.
Shawnee said jokingly as he held up the .45 caliber handgun.
Sure he is,
Jimmy said sarcastically.
Dude, put that down.
Terry said.
You know having weed in a gun in Pennsylvania is an automatic, 10 years in jail?
He continued.
Don't be scared, it's not loaded,
he said, as he put the gun back in his waistband. The rest of the trip was relatively quiet, as the lot of them were a bit shaken up by the insane, gun-wielding gas station clerk. Just a dozen or so miles down the road, they pulled off the paved road and onto a dirt one. A bumpy dirt road that twisted and turned up a mountain. The road that led to the camp at Locust Lake. Finally, the group of them had made it to their destination. They pulled into the driveway of the camp, and as they approached, a large sign with fancy lettering appeared from behind the trees. "Welcome to Locust Lake," read the fancy letters of the wooden banner. while behind the letters there was a painting of a sun setting behind the mountains beyond the lake. The lot of them piled out of their vehicles and began exploring their surroundings. The area was beautiful. There was a small lake that could barely be considered a lake, and beside it, there was a large field that was filled with dandelions. Around the lake and off into the woods, there sat several cabins. Many of them had gone through some renovations. This year, the camp was going to change its name from Camp Locust Lake to something a bit more comfy. Just a gosh darn camp. Troy hated the new name, as did all his friends, but it was his parents' camp, and they could do what they wanted with it. After they all stretched a bit, they made their way up to the cabin that Troy would usually stay in when he went there, and on the door there was pinned a note. The note read, "Troy, thank you for fixing up the camp for us. Here's a list of things we need you to do. 1. Fix loose boards and railings. 2. Trim the trees and make it safe. 3. Mow the grass. 4. Paint the cabins and make it look like a gosh darn camp. P.S. No drugs and no alcohol." Troy laughed at the no drugs or no alcohol part, because he knew that at least 3 people there had weed on them, and he planned on getting a keg for the weekend. If they're going to be fixing up the place, they might as well have fun while doing it. While Troy went to town to get the keg, the rest of the adults smoked a bowl, while the kids played in the apple orchard nearby. Shiloh was sitting in her playpen inside the cabin, playing with her doll that was nearly as big as she was.
So that's Locust Lake. It looks a lot smaller than it did when we were kids.
Jimmy said.
"It's not the size that matters,"
said a girl's voice from the road behind them. It was Laura, an old friend of theirs that lived in a town a few miles away.
Hey, Laura.
Aubri said.
What's up?
She continued.
"Not too much. How are you guys?"
Laura asked.
Pretty good. Pretty good.
Terry said, the rest of them agreeing.
How'd you know we were here?
Jimmy asked, happily.
"Terry gave me a call yesterday, and I figured I would stop by. It's been a long time since I've seen you guys."
Laura answered.
Yeah, it has.
Aubri said.
"Where's Troy at?"
Laura asked.
He's down getting the keg. You probably passed him on the way here.
Terry answered her.
"Oh, cool. I could go for a beer, if that's all right."
Laura asked.
Of course it's all right.
Aubri told her. The group of them reminisced and caught up on what was new in each other's lives as they waited for Troy to return. Jimmy had gathered some wood and was starting a fire in a fire pit large enough to roast a pig in when Troy pulled up to the camp with a keg. He was greeted by his wife and Laura, who surprised him when he pulled up. It was a big reunion of old friends. After spending some time reminiscing and telling stories that began with, "This one time when we were really stoned," Laura decided it was time to leave. She had to get home before it got too late because she wasn't prepared to spend the night. The group of them said their goodbyes, and Laura began walking down the hill as the sun was beginning to set. Her car was parked down by Troy's parents' house, back around the house and out of view of the road. Laura made it to her car, but she didn't make it beyond there. This is when things began to go wrong. As Laura approached her car, she was attacked from behind by a hooded figure. She struggled against her attacker, but she was silenced when her head was forced through the glass window of her car. In normal circumstances of an ejection in a car accident, the tempered glass would simply fracture into thousands of small pieces as the victim passed through the window, but these small bits of glass tend to stick together in larger sheets and with enough downward force upon their broken edges, they can still easily cut through flesh. And this is exactly what the hooded man did. He pushed her downward onto the broken glass, which cut deeply into her stomach, jaggedly slicing into her gut and spilling her intestines out of her torso and down the side of her white car. Laura was dead, and none of the others knew it. The party continued, and they planned to begin fixing up the camp the next day. That night, everyone slept peacefully in their cabins before the work began the following morning. Aubri retrieved the pole saw so that she could cut the branches high up in the trees so that the dangerous limbs wouldn't fall and hit anybody, while Troy began fixing up the loose railings that led down to the dock that was connected to the cabin near the lake. Jimmy and Shawnee began painting one of the cabins up on the hill. The cabins were supposed to be brown with yellow trim. As the rest of them worked, Terry decided he would take a walk down the road a ways to a friend's house, whose name was James, not to be confused with Jimmy. They both had the same first name and different last names. Terry figured that James would probably like to come help everybody, since it had been a long time since the lot of them had hung out with each other. They used to hang out all the time, after all. Terry walked a ways down the road and passed right by Troy's parents' house, not knowing that right on the other side of the house was Laura's car, covered in her blood and entrails. Down the road at the bottom of the hill was James's house. He lived with his mother, whom he hated, and his father, who was always working. Terry knocked on the door, and James answered.
Hey, man!
Terry said.
Holy crap, what's up? What are you doing here?
James asked.
Troy brought us down. Everyone's up at camp, working to fix it up for Troy's parents.
Terry answered.
Oh.
James said, his tone changing from excitement to disappointment.
You want to come hang out with us?
Terry asked him.
Who's all there?
James asked, quietly.
Troy, Aubri, the kids, Shawnee, Jimmy, and me.
Terry answered.
Oh. Okay.
James said.
Sorry. I can't go up there. I gotta help my mom with something.
He continued.
What do you need to help her with?
Terry said, confused because he knew James hated his mom and wouldn't do a damn thing to help her.
The camp gives me the creeps, man. I never liked it up there, and I never knew why. Not until a few years ago, anyway.
James admitted.
What do you mean?
Terry asked. It was then that James broke down and told the story of an orphanage that used to sit beside the lake a long, long time ago, and how the nuns that ran the orphanage were cruel people. They would beat the children, and they were very strict. Jim told Terry the story of one particular child that was abandoned there by his parents, that no longer wanted him. Mother Stoical, the head nun at the orphanage, took the child and gave him her last name. His first name was written on a piece of paper that was left with him. His name was Casper. Casper Stoical. The child was deformed, with odd bone growths on his head and a hair lip that connected his nostril to his lip. He was a bit of a slow learner, but he was a very artistic child. He didn't get along with the other children, however, and one day, a fight broke out between him and another child, the woman that had taken him in, the woman that he had seen as his mother, then attempted to baptize what she saw as demons out of Casper by submerging him into the lake, and it was only a short time before the boy drowned. The poor boy drowned in the lake, and then the nun covered it up by weighing down his body with stones and letting them pull him to the bottom. James explained to him that there was even a rhyme to the story. How many seconds can you take? Holding your breath at Locust Lake. 5. The orphan boy is at the bottom. 10. He's dead and rotten. 15. He's creeping up. 20. You're out of luck. 25. Right beneath your feet. 30. Pull you down beneath.
Dude, that's crazy. Are you sure it was this lake?
Terry asked him, not believing any of the story.
Yeah, man. It happened at Locust Lake. And not only that, there's a story I found in an old newspaper. It's talking about how some kids disappeared up there in the 80s. And no one ever found out what happened to them.
Jim replied.
No, I'm sure you're talking about a different lake, man. It can't be this Locust Lake. Troy and I are like horror experts, and I think we would have heard about it if kids were disappearing at his parents' camp.
Terry said.
So, are you coming or not? I gotta get back up there.
He finished.
No, man. Sorry, but I'm staying down here. You have fun up there in Murderville.
James answered.
Alright, you pansy. I'll see you later.
Terry said as he got up to leave.
Tell everyone I said hey.
James added as Terry went out the door. After Terry left, James went back to his chores that he was doing before Terry had knocked on the door. A sink full of bubbles and dishes awaited him. He had his own work to do. As Jim began to wash the dishes, he was approached from behind. It was a tall, dark figure. He wore a black, hooded mask with an X stitched over one eye with dirty brown rope. Also, where the mouth was, there was a stitching of jagged and crossing patterns to form a twisted smile of a mouth. Jim was able to see the reflection of the hulking man behind him in the kitchen window. But it was too late. Jim's face was sent smashing down into the sink. His head broke the dishes, and as he struggled for air, his face was cut in several places by the broken glass and silverware in the sink. Jim struggled for a long time, and he panicked as he fought. Drowning was his biggest fear, and he was being drowned in dishwater, filled with soap and his own blood. It felt like hours to him, but it was only moments. Jim's body fell limp, and he was dead. His mom would find him the next day when she returned home, but the group of his friends up the hill would never even realize it. Terry quickly made it back up to camp, where he told everyone the story of Casper Stoical, and just like how Terry had not believed James, the rest of them also didn't believe it. They all continued their work, but Shawnee was interrupted. His girlfriend called him from his flip phone, and the bunch of them could tell by how loud she was that she was not happy. She was yelling at him over the phone, and everyone could hear it. Turns out that he told her he was spending the weekend with Troy, but he had failed to mention that he was going several hours out of town to do so, and now she needed him for something, and he wasn't around. He spent the next several minutes trying to apologize and explain himself, but eventually it got so bad that he hung up on her. She tried to call him back, but he hit the power button and ignored her. Shawnee decided to try and relax, so he split off from the group and went down to the storage shed that was near to the cabin closest to Troy's parents' house. This cabin was far out of view from the rest of the group, just down the hill of the large field. The field that Shawnee now intended to mow. He opened the doors to the shed, hoping to find a riding mower, but all that he found was an old gas-powered push mower.
Of course they don't have a riding mower,
Shawnee said with a sigh. Shawnee decided to make the best of things and roll a joint to smoke while he broke his back mowing the field with a push mower. After rolling it up and lighting it, Shawnee began mowing down by the cabin and working his way around there before taking the mower to the top of the hill and working his way down. He didn't get much done, however, because soon the mower died down and completely stalled on him. He tried to get it started again, but it would not start. It was not out of gas because he just filled it prior to starting it up. Shawnee tipped the mower on its side and discovered that there was a thick buildup of grass that clung to the bottom of the mower. It had not been cleaned out in quite some time, and the buildup was preventing the mower from working properly. He began pulling the grass out from around the blades and revealing the rusted metal beneath the coating of years' worth of grass. It wasn't long before Shawnee noticed movement, but before he could react, he was grabbed from behind, around the back of his neck, by a large, dirty hand. He watched as a boot came down to the handle of the mower in front of him, pressing the bar down that allowed the mower to start. Then the large man leaned down and grabbed a hold of the pull cord, and with one quick pull, the mower started up and the blades began to spin. Shawnee screamed, but his voice was drowned out by the sound of the mower, which was now mere inches from his face. The large man stood beside the mower, holding his foot over the bar to keep the machine running, and slowly he pushed Shawnee's face forward. He screamed and screamed as the blades sliced through his nose, severing it from his face. His shrieks of terror then turned into gurgling as the blades cut deeper, cutting off his lips and ripping through his eyes. The blades didn't stop until they were a good ways through his skull, when his face was completely gone. The mower died out, and so did he. Hours passed, and the group continued to party and prepare the camp. Eventually, they began to wonder what happened to Shawnee. It was getting dark, and he still had not returned, so Troy, Jimmy, and Terry all split off in different directions to go look for Shawnee, while Aubri stayed near the fire with the kids. Troy checked through the woods, and Jimmy checked near the road. It was Terry who had the unfortunate luck of checking the field and the cabins near where Shawnee was killed. Terry made his way down the hill and found the lawnmower, now standing upright in the grass. But as he approached, he almost instantly noticed that something was wrong. The grass around the mower was stained red. Terry inspected it and quickly discovered what it was. It was blood. He turned to run, but tripped over a leg that stuck out from the tall weeds and brush on the side of the hill. A leg that connected to a body without a face. Terry stumbled to the ground, and a large shadow loomed over him. It was Casper Stoical, the demon of Locust Lake. Terry looked around for any way to defend himself. He found the gun in Shawnee's waistband and reached for it. He grabbed it, aimed it at Casper, but when he pulled the trigger, there was only a click. Shawnee still had the clip for the gun in his pocket. The gun wasn't loaded. Terry was knocked unconscious when he was hit with a large tree branch. He would soon awake in even more dire circumstances. When he came to, he found his arms were tightly bound to a tree, while his legs were bound to the back end of Laura's car. The car was parked at the top of the driveway, a driveway that was at a bit of a steep incline. The hulking man, clad in a black hood and a blood and dirt-stained tan-colored coat, stood over Terry, who now begged and pleaded for his life. Casper looked at him with an expressionless grin of his stitchy mask and tilted his head to the side before opening the door to the car, putting it in neutral and pushing it forward down the hill. Terry screamed, begging and pleading as the car lurched forward. It stopped for a moment when his body became taut with the rope, and then his skin began to split before his entrails spilled out onto the ground, his spine splitting into two, and the lower half of his body was dragged down the hill behind the car, which traveled for a long way down the road before crashing into a tree. It was dark now, and everyone who still lived managed to make their way back to the fire. It was about 20 minutes before they began to fear that something had not only happened to Shawnee, but also Terry. It was then that all of them would discover what had happened to their friends, and discover how much danger they were really in. A scream came from young Sabrina before she was silenced by a harvesting sickle. The sharp, curved blade of the rusty sickle sliced clean through her neck, separating her head from her body, causing her mother and older sister to scream in terror as their gaze went upward from the girl's head, held in a dirty hand, up to a stitchwork black mask with an eerily emotionless yet happy face stitched onto it. Casper dropped the head of the girl into the fire before grabbing a large burning branch from beside the head, and with one quick motion, he snatched that burning branch from the fire and buried it deep into Jimmy's face, crushing his skull inward and melting the skin away from his face. Troy grabbed a large rock and hurled it at the hulking beast of the man. The stone hit him upside the head, and as he lurched forward, Jimmy dropped into the fire, and the black cloth fell off of Casper's head. In the fire, his face glimmered. His skin was raw and red in places, and in other places it was covered with pus and had rotted away to reveal the bone beneath. His nose was gone, his hairlip now connecting a mouth filled with broken and jagged teeth to a hole where a nose once was. His left eye, the eye that was covered by the X stitched into the mask, was missing. Only a gaping, empty socket remained. His head and face were also covered with large growths, where the bone of his deformed skull had begun to split the skin apart. The fire lit up Casper's countenance. As he looked over to where the stone had come from, he saw Troy, who was trying to taunt the beast away from his children and wife. Casper grabbed his mask and pulled it over his head before giving chase to Troy. Troy ran through the woods, and Casper followed him. Casper moved slower than Troy, but with his large size, his steps traveled more ground. Troy made his way up the hill until he found an old log cabin. The cabin was falling apart, and he attempted to hide from Casper inside this old makeshift hut. Casper appeared from the woods near the cabin and made his way to the door, just barely on its hinges. He swung the door open and peered inside. The light from the full moon shone into the small, ragged cabin. Inside, Troy had tucked himself behind some old, mildew-covered cardboard boxes, but he could see a mattress laying on the floor, an old blue cooler that was being used as a table, and a melted, burnt-out candle sat atop it, its wax clinging to the lid of the cooler. There were piles of animal bones and car keys, lighters and cell phones. Someone had been living here. Troy had sought refuge inside Casper's home, and he was terrified. Casper's gurgling and raspy breaths could be heard as he looked for Troy. Each breath bubbled with the sound of rancid water, still in Casper's lungs. Troy held his breath as the door swung closed again, and Casper's heavy footsteps began to fade away. Then Troy slowly got up and peeked outside. But it was dark, and he couldn't see much of anything amongst the shadows of the forest, even with the full moon's light overhead. he quickly came to the decision that he had to leave. He had to get back to the camp to protect his wife, and more importantly, his children. Troy exited the cabin and began to run back down the hill toward the other cabins. But he was quickly tackled to the ground, knocking the wind out of him. He struggled against the large hands of the brutish man, and he began to scream. But he was pinned down under a heavy weight, and a hand came up from under his jaw to force his mouth closed. Then Casper retrieved something from his pocket. It was a big hook, like a fishing hook, with a thick string tied to it. Casper took the large rusty hook and stuck it painfully through Troy's bottom lip, and then through his top lip just above it, before looping back around to repeat the process. He began to stitch Troy's mouth shut as Troy shook and convulsed beneath him. He stitched a mouth onto Troy's face, a mouth of jagged and crisscross shapes, similar to the mouth of his mask. He then took the hook and punctured the end of the hook into Troy's eyeball and through his eyebrow. He stitched a large X across and through Troy's eye. He went into shock and passed out from the pain, but that isn't what killed him. Casper then dragged Troy back to the fire by his feet, back to where they had started. Aubri and the remaining 2 children could not escape in time before Casper's return, so they hid in a small cabin just out of the light of the fire. There, Aubri watched out the window. She covered her daughter's eyes, and the hulking man lifted Troy's body up and impaled him onto a broken tree branch. This is what killed him. He let out a grunt as his back and chest were pierced by a long broken limb sticking out of the tree. Aubri had to silence herself when she saw her husband's body tacked onto the tree. She then watched as Casper grabbed Jimmy's corpse and Sabrina's decapitated body and pinned them onto several other broken branches, sticking all the corpses to a tree like a morbid work of art. He then walked away, probably to retrieve the remaining corpses to add them to his grotesque tree. This is when Aubri took action. She grabbed her daughter Shiloh and took hold of Monica's arms, and together they began to run toward the hill. But sadly, they didn't make it very far. Casper lunged out of the darkness and grabbed a hold of Monica, snatching her right out of her mother's grasp, and with great force, in one motion, he flung the small girl several dozen feet away, where she too was impaled upon the tree. Casper had added another body to his work of disgusting art. Aubri screamed at the sight of her 2 eldest daughters, her husband, and her friends, all dead at the hands of this beast. She quickly fled back into the cabin and locked the door behind her. Casper chased after her and began pounding on the door, the wood around the locks cracking more and more with each blow to the door. Casper broke down the door just in time to see Aubri escaping out the window of the small cabin with her daughter. She held her baby girl in her arms and ran down the hill toward the truck. Faster and faster she ran, and the truck soon was in sight. Then, she suddenly stopped. She coughed up blood that landed upon her daughter in her arms. Aubri looked down to find the blade of the pole saw sticking out of the middle of her chest. The blade then sliced quickly upward, ripping her open from her chest and down through her stomach, missing her infant daughter by mere inches before the blade was pulled backwards. Her guts spilled out of her as the pole saw then slashed across her neck with such force that it sliced her head clean off. The pole saw's handle snapped in half from the force of the blow, severing her spine. Her head flopped off her shoulders and rolled away down the hill, her body dropping to the ground, with her daughter still clutched in her arms. Casper then took the broken handle of the saw and stabbed it down into the baby, still being clutched in the dead woman's arms. But when he drew the broken wooden pole back up, only stuffing came with it. Aubri was not carrying her baby. She was carrying a doll. She had hidden her daughter Shiloh away to protect her. The police came across the chaos not long after the sun came up, after they were called by the mother of James, who lived down the hill. They put two and two together and came across more blood up the hill at Locust Lake. When they got there, they discovered a tree covered with death. Everyone was dead. Everyone except for a crying baby girl hidden in a small cabin.
While some stories are reaching their end, others may be just getting started. Of course, some have a better stamina for the macabre than others. After all, how many seconds can you take camping on the shores of Locust Lake? My guess is about 3 acts worth. But before you pack up your tents and machetes, remember to stop by again next weekend for more mayhem by the mileful. And until then, make sure to like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications so I can catch you all again next Saturday.